Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Scuttlebutt. Before we dive into the episode, we are very proud to welcome and celebrate our first sponsor. D&D Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage began as a small hauling and used auto parts operation in the Pittsburgh area in the late 1970s and has grown into a full-service metal recycling company with two locations, Lawrenceville and Tarentum. These are state-of-the-art scrapyards with deep roots in the community and a strong commitment to the service of their customers. D&D accepts all types of metal, both ferrous and non-ferrous, that may be generated by industrial manufacturing, construction and demolition, small commercial entities, as well as individual customers. They have a wide variety of material handling equipment and are capable of managing any job in a timely and efficient manner. You can contact them for quotes and availability at dndautosalvage.com. That's D and D autosalvage.com. Thank you, D&D, for supporting this podcast. And now, on with the show.
I remember being a child, I couldn't have been more than 6 years old. And my father was a senior drill sergeant at Fort Benning in Georgia. And I'd gone in to work with him for the day. He, walked me over to where the soldiers were sitting. His, drill sergeant hat brim was low. He's got me by the hand and they jump up and to attention and say, "Good morning, drill sergeant." He says, "Good morning, soldiers. Say good morning to my daughter." And they scream to the top of their lungs, "Good morning, ma'am." That sticks with an individual.
Welcome, everyone, to the Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. Our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Our program, the Scuttlebutt, was created with the educational element of our mission in mind to discuss recent military headlines and topics to help bridge the military-civilian divide. If you've been watching the Scuttlebutt but haven't yet, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and ring that bell on YouTube because we want you to be the first to know when we release new episodes every Monday. And we'd love to hear from you as well so that we can have a mail call here on the Scuttlebutt. So please email me at Sean, that's SHAUN, the odd spelling, I know, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. I am very excited for today's program about veteran champions. We're going to dive into that topic very soon. And joining me are two awesome veterans in the veteran space. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Nefertari, thank you for joining us for the first time on the Scuttlebutt.
Thank you for having me, Sean. And thank you for giving your time, your listening audience. I mean, my name is Nefertari Strickland. I am a veteran. I'm also a dependent. Both my parents served in the Army. Both were non-commissioned officers in 2000. Well, no, actually, let me back up. 1996. I enlisted in the Georgia Army National Guard. It was the first of the 48th Brigade Support Battalion as a 17-year-old at the time. So it was quite a while ago. As a signaleer, anybody who's Army, who's listening knows it was a 74 Bravo before Signal became a 25 series. I had a break in service about 2000, but then re-enlisted to commission through the 243rd Regional Training Institute in Narragansett, Rhode Island. So then I joined the Rhode Island Army National Guard, commissioned in Signal as well, and currently serve with the 28th Infantry Division in Pennsylvania. So thank you again for having me.
Of course. And what break was that? How many years between 2000 and?
Do I have to count? At least 15, about 15 years.
Oh, okay. I was thinking like a couple, but yeah, that's a significant break to then come back.
And you said that was it was streaming online as well as the audio. So you see the gray, right? It's real.
I love it. I get the same sort of it's salty. And Kathy, thank you so much for joining us on the Scuttlebutt today. Really super excited for both to join us.
Well, I'm probably older than both of you combined almost, but so my name is Kathy Lowry Gallowitz. I'm a third generation veteran. My grandfather was Army, my father was active Navy, and I joined the Air Force. My branches were public affairs and nursing. I was active for 6 years in the guard for 18 or more. And then I was also in the reserves. Before the age of 35, I'd lived in at least 20 different communities because of all the moving I'd done, either as a military kid or as an Air Force officer. So I hope we can talk about that a little bit more later. And then I'm also married to a career active Army retiree who was in logistics and recruiting and a combat veteran. Thanks so much for having us and for the inspirational message and work that you all do as civilian veteran champions.
And that is exactly the term that I was going to bring up for our phrase of the week was veteran champions. It's civilian veteran champions, but I'm guessing there are veteran champions as well. And I thought that maybe we could define what those are.
Could I jump in there?
Yeah.
So, yes, through my business Vanguard veteran, I define a civilian veteran champion as someone who creates mutually beneficial activities and services that promote quality of life, workforce, and community. Because I contend that as a civilian gets to know a veteran, and I bet you and Todd, Sean, can attest to this, that your quality of life is enriched as you hear about all the great stuff that they have done, their values-based focus, and just frankly, their personalities and their spirit, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I believe when veterans and civilians interface in a community level, that we enrich each other's lives and our quality of life for everyone is enhanced. Another great example is an employer. When an employer hires veteran talent, they get someone who's more mission focused, less absent, more productive, more disciplined, technologically savvy, and can generate cost savings. What a win-win, right? And then last but not least, in 2015, the American Enterprise Institute came out with a study that found that veterans were, quote unquote, broke no more. They looked at 11 criteria of civic engagement and found that veterans were civic assets because of all they do in the community. So I call a civilian who creates these mutually beneficial activities and services a veteran champion. My terminology for a veteran who's giving back, doing all kinds of wonderful work, I call them veteran advocates to distinguish between those who have served and those who haven't served. So let me start off right away and again say, thank you, Sean and Todd, for creating that community of listening to tell those stories that are so meaningful and healing for our veterans to share. Thank you for being civilian veteran champions.
I really appreciate that. And Todd, that Kathy is speaking of is my boss, Todd DiPastino, who is the executive director for the Veterans Breakfast Club. But Nefertari, what does that mean to you? Those terms, a veteran advocate, a veteran champion?
Well, it's interesting because I, again, being a dependent, didn't understand the concept of a veteran. Mm-hmm. I only knew everyone around me that was service connected, whether they were a dependent, a spouse, a child, or the service member themselves. So it wasn't until my mother actually retired after my father, but my mother retired stateside, that I start to understand that there were at the time gaps in support. There's always resources, but in terms of a service member or a veteran understanding what they're entitled to and what's available to them. And that's when I started to see individuals attempt to fill those gaps. And sometimes they're canyons, right? It's not just like crossing a bridge. So for me, it is that entrepreneurial mindset that I see in veterans and that I see in civilians that want to serve veterans, that it's more than just directional, hey, go over here, do this, but it really is ensuring that an individual understands what they have access to or what they need, and then following up with them. So for me, those champions will not only create awareness, but they will take action. And in the military, specifically the Army, we talk about leadership, right? Mm-hmm. So providing purpose, direction, and motivation, accomplishing the mission while improving the organization. And if you just stay in your lane, if you just do your job, sometimes we miss out on the opportunities to improve the organization. So whether you're a veteran supporter or a veteran who is that champion, thank you for your service.
Hey, Neff, may I say hallelujah, well done, because it really needs to go beyond just saying thank you for your service. that is very much appreciated by all our service members, veterans, and their families, acknowledging their service and sacrifices. But if we don't follow that up with action, practical support, listening, hiring a veteran, creating a military ministry within your congregation, everybody can do something. It's not rocket science, it's people science, paying attention, getting informed, and acting. Thank you for emphasizing that, Nefertari.
And emphasizing the beyond thank you for your service, which we, if you're watching on YouTube, you see this above Kathy's head. This is the title of your book, right, Kathy?
Right.
Yep. And what drove you to write this book? Did you write this before you transitioned back to civilian life, or was this something you always had a thought of?
I served for about 29 years, and I also had a break in service of about 7 years because I had a child with leukemia, and so I need to help him get through that. But no, we all have kind of dreams, and I'm not. My personality is more of an extrovert, not someone who likes to sit behind a computer and write forever. So it was a challenging experience, but very rewarding in the end. And what I hoped to do was to educate and inspire civilians, giving them practical ideas from any segment of society. So we covered educators, employers, health community leaders, and clergy, giving practical ideas about how you can serve, and or as a neighbor even, what you can do for a veteran from your circle of influence, what you can do as a neighbor, what you can do as a mom or dad. It was very practically based and showcased about 20 veteran champions from Ohio, mostly, that I had the privilege of working alongside through military civilian coalitions, where we really purposefully engage those civilians to take them beyond thank you for your service. Because, literature suggests that 55% of our military connected community, in particular Afghanistan and Iraq veterans, 55% feel disconnected from mainstream America. And because I had moved so much in my up until the age of 35, it really dawned on me when I went to a funeral. I think I was 40 when I went to my first funeral, and realized, I'd never been to a funeral except for the funeral of my grandmother. I didn't even understand what a city council member was or a county commissioner. And there were all these other things that I just sort of felt on the periphery of the country that, I was serving, that I'd grown up, supporting my father's military service. And so I experienced firsthand sort of that feeling of disconnection because of my time as a military dependent and a military officer, and also a military spouse.
It's very interesting because if our audience has listened through sort of the entire series of the Scuttlebutt, we've touched on a lot of these different topics throughout. Can you say thank you for your service? Is it enough? Whenever veterans come back into the civilian space, where does that desire to continue to serve, where does it go? What does it lead into? Leaders in the veteran space, they come back, they become, entrepreneurs. There's so much that we've touched on that I feel like, it keeps on coming up in each individual podcast. And Nefertari, I'm interested in ask you about your podcast, the Third Lieutenant. This seems like another way for when you came back to continue that service in a way. Could you tell me a bit about it?
So I didn't realize when that seed started to sprout. I was actually on deployment 2018 timeframe with Task Force Spartan in the Middle East, and I was attending classes online for my master's degree with Penn State, and trying to find a strong internet connection and a quiet space in the same space. It's quite challenging forward deployed, right? Everybody's playing dominoes or video games, or just really trying to decompress in their own way. And so there was a lot of frustration that I experienced then, again, not knowing that was a seed that was planted. So came back home, started to adjust back into life with my family and my career. And then the pandemic But what was on my mind is continuing my education. And I started to explore options for a doctoral program, but the pandemic made it almost impossible. So I was like, what can I do? Because I started to think about what were my motives? What was my motivation for wanting Dr. Strickland to become, a part of reality? And in the podcast, because my undergraduate is actually mass communications and radio and television, the podcast was a real easy way for me to start to inquire, do research, survey people, interview people. And that's what I've been doing. So the Third Lieutenant podcast is focused on education for the service member, the dependent, the supporter, and how their education plays a role in their success. Because often when we talk about service members, it's like warrior or wounded warrior, right? When we talk about higher education, it's GI Bill, free college, end of discussion. Right. And there's so much more. So I'm in season 2, and I've had an opportunity to interview some amazing individuals. I should do a count of the number of doctoral degrees, master's degrees. And yeah, I'm going to put points on the board so we can really take a look at it, because it's a way for me to give while receiving at the same time.
And in the idea of receiving, it's about education. How have you felt educated during the filming of the podcast?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One, just understanding how they balance everything, whether they're National Guardsmen, came through ROTC when they pursued their education. I would say most officers that you meet, all officers beyond like the second lieutenant, they're going to have a college degree, right? And that's not something that is often known or realized or discussed when we start talking about military service. It's discipline, it's regimented, it's, they can follow instructions, they can lead, but we're a highly educated group of individuals. So I think it's interesting.
It's very, and both of you come from a military family. That's something that we understood in the data that we looked at way back at the beginning of the Scuttlebutt was most people serving come from military families. Kathy, were you influenced by that growing up, and did they not like that you went into Air Force?
I was heavily influenced by that. I tell you, as a young gal, I just fundamentally grew up to appreciate my country, the freedoms that we have, the luxuries that we have, because, I had the opportunity to live in different cultures. I went to a French-speaking preschool in Paris, France, then came back to the United States, and in the middle of my junior year in high school in Fairfax, Virginia, the Beltway area around the Pentagon, my dad was stationed at the Pentagon. I went from a class of 400 as a varsity cheerleader and moved to a base in the middle of the North Atlantic, graduating from Alfred T. Mahan High School in a class of 30 in Keflavik, Iceland. Okay. Do you think that made an impact on me? Heck yeah. Well, then from there, I went on to go to college in Germany. So, I lived in Italy. I was stationed in England. Now, I haven't been over to the East like Nefertari has, but, I had a lot of cultural experiences, and I loved that. I loved the service aspect. I grew up as a Girl Scout. I'm a Gold Award recipient. I loved leadership. And my brother went to the Naval Academy. Okay. So, I just saw it from all different vantage points. And frankly, I tell people I had red, white, and blue coursing through my veins. And what I really wanted out of my life was to have a career in the military.
For Terry, this is the same question.
So for me, it was easy to adopt the culture. And I'll tell you, a lot of my experiences are similar to Kathy. I actually joined junior ROTC in high school because when we returned stateside from Germany, I was there for about 7.5 years, went to elementary, middle, and through 10th grade, halfway through 10th grade in Department of Defense schools in Europe. And so I wanted to play for the best basketball team in my area, which wasn't where I lived. Right. So I had to have a reason to get bussed across town to this school. And my options were medical magnet or military magnet. I knew I didn't want to be a professional in the medical field. So military is easy. Like my father was a drill sergeant. My mother was an air traffic controller, right? So it's nothing. No one can yell at me or make me do a push-up that I haven't done, right? So I joined.
I believe it.
I joined
That sounds like a little stressful household. Like my dad's an air traffic controller, and boy,
Oh,
yeah.
So I got bused across town to play basketball. ROTC was super easy. The opportunity came when the school received a grant for a pilot license training program. So I had a private pilot's license before I had a driver's license in high school. And so when the recruiters started coming around, they are slick. They are slick. And so they did have me enlist in the National Guard. So for me, it was too easy to make the decision. But as Kathy said, like the patriotism is just, it is just a part of who you are, right? And it doesn't help to be overseas at a time when some people call it propaganda, right? But that American greatness and the Coca-Cola commercials, and it's just, a loving world, and Michael Jackson's on television singing "We Are the World." Like I viewed all of that external to what we call the real world, which was the States. And so I was in Europe when the Berlin Wall fell. As Kathy said, when we studied about Pisa, we went to Italy. We studied about the Eiffel Tower. We went to Paris, so it was an amazing opportunity. And I am working today to continue to spread that, to continue to support the community that I'm in. And that's why I've continued to serve in the National Guard, because to me, that is a symbol that I am sharing with my community, that I am here to serve you. I'm not from where you're from, right? But I will commit to serving currently now the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
And through your podcast, I read something about the 50-meter target. I thought maybe we could understand a little bit more about what that means to you.
But depending on, how you qualify when you go through weapons qualification, that 50-meter target is the easiest to hit. Right. So don't expend all your rounds trying to hit targets that are 300 meters out. That 50-meter target, right? If you're mindful, it'll get you a little closer to your objective. So again, for us, especially as commissioned officers, it's a no-brainer with the degree. Like that's a requirement in order to retain, once you've been commissioned, if you hadn't achieved it already, to retain that commission status. So that 50-meter target for a lot of us is just that first hurdle closest to us.
Kathy, what was the first hurdle that you had to overcome whenever you transitioned back to the civilian world?
Well, I think Neff would agree with this. When you're in the Guard, you kind of have a toe in each camp. You have a toe in the military camp and you have a toe in the civilian camp, if you will, right? And you're not necessarily moving as much. So you have a pretty decent support system, even though, we work around 85% men. I had a few colleagues, friends in the military, but most of my support system was civilian, which is unlike the support system that active duty people have, right? And I had moved so much, and I think I counted up all the different kinds of careers I had at one point. It was like in 6 different industries, 17 different jobs, plus all those additional duties we do, and all the different cultures you live in, And so my saw, maybe, if you will, had been pretty sharpened, and I was pretty self-aware, knew what I loved, knew what I was pretty good at. And so the transition for me, and oh, by the way, I'll just throw this out there. I also believe that, women have to be pretty adaptable, because we're transitioning amongst, the workforce, motherhood, being a wife, being an aunt, sister. I mean, there's just, you have to be highly adaptable to accomplish everything you need to accomplish as a woman. So the transition wasn't that hard. I just dug deep into, there's been so much great work done cultivating civilian veteran champions that I cannot let go of that. So I started my business and zeroed in on helping employers acquire and keep veteran talent, and faith communities developing military ministries inside congregations. and also providing leadership development training and coaching. So, my whole life's been about transition, right? Nefertari, when you move back from overseas, and I mean, that's just what we do. Is it easy? No. Is it completely intimidating? Absolutely not. Is it doable? Heck yeah.
And that's the mission of Vanguard Veteran?
The mission of Vanguard Veteran is to equip civilians to become veteran champions and be a part of the win.
So how would, me being a civilian, how would you equip me to do that?
Okay, I primarily focus on employers and faith community leaders. Employers acquiring and keep talent, knowing how to source, hire, and retain veteran talent in ways that strengthen their workforce, and equipping volunteers within congregations to start practical and spiritual based military ministries that foster a sense of connection, a sense of belonging, and I believe ultimately will help curb suicide. Those are my primary veteran champion activities, but I do lots of speaking to civic groups and veteran groups to help expand their thinking and get them to go beyond thank you for your service.
Now, this is a key part of the mission is working with ministries. Did you grow up in a very religious household? Like, how did that sort of passion also develop?
So I am a Christian, and yes, I have been saved, and I'm happy to share that. And I've gone to church most of my life, but as I learned through the VA, how critical civilian clergy are in responding to the spiritual wounds of primarily combat warriors, I was really moved by that, moved by moral injury, soul injury, and because 40% of our warriors feel disconnected from or alienated from God and or have a tough time finding meaning and purpose post-combat, more importantly. And I mean, I've experienced that firsthand in my military ministry. We call it Vet Connect at Christ Church of Fountain Hills. It's all about really minimizing isolation and just fostering connection.
Mm. You said something that Nefertari, I want to ask you about. Kathy, you said that you had a support group of civilians, which is very different than the support group the active service men and women have. And I hadn't really put those things together in my head until you said that. And that's why I want to ask Nefertari about that is, did you find that you had that split support system as well? And how did you traverse both of those worlds?
So for me, it was a little different. I don't feel as though we were civilian heavy. I do find that the mindset, though, leans toward the civilian side in the National Guard, right? We have so many challenges that doctrinally that we're not directed how to navigate because our mission set is different. We wear a uniform that looks very similar to our active component, and we do a lot of tactical training that puts us in a space where we're notionally fighting an enemy somewhere near Poland. But in actuality, we're trying to figure out how to get all of our training done in the 2 days on the weekend that we have. We do have civilians that support us. I did notice on deployment, like some of our cooks weren't cooking. We had contractors that were, foreign nationals that would prepare our meals. For me, the kind of duality or the multiple hat wearing with civilian and kind of military worlds that does happen, like Kathy said, when your weekend drill is over and you have to take your uniform off, or when you deploy and you demob, like getting back into the battle rhythm of life can be challenging for some. And so like when I have drill on the weekend, I'll work for 5 days. I would go to drill for 2 days, sometimes 3 days, then I'll go right back into work and not have a day off. So that can be challenging. So learning how to pace yourself, learning how to communicate with your structure, your support structure, your family is really important. But that mindset, being able to turn it on and turn it off, to me, that's the two warring halves of the military and civilian worlds.
Because the culture is just so different, right? And how you function in each is, it takes time to transition. I want to emphasize one point though about the network that I mentioned. Having been, active duty reserve and guard, and lived with an active duty soldier who was only active duty and transitioned to the civilian workforce. You know, I believe that the very best things in life come from knowing people well from your network, be it your job because you have a reputation and you have a track record and you have a by name reference to someone who is trusted. I mean, 75% of all jobs come from referrals from people that or the other thing that hit me was I always had strangers babysitting my children because I never lived near my family, and I had to really take leaps of faith because I didn't have a strong network that I grew up with. But that's a real bummer, for lack of a better word, for active duty people who spend 20 years away from their roots more often than not, or longer, and come home and their friends have changed. People don't know them as well. So that's why civilian veteran champions are so important, to meet our service members halfway, if not more than halfway, to help them connect to their neighborhood, to a potential employer, and hopefully maybe even a place of worship where they can be welcomed with open arms.
I wanted to just jump in because we have a scripture. Our infantry division has a proverb scripture. It's iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, like, we trace our lineage all the way back to Benjamin Franklin, we really do, and take a lot of pride in that. Something that has been on my plate and something that I am working to better understand is, how service members, veterans, dependents can support their communities as we're coming out of this pandemic. And there's one area that I've been focused on, and Sean, I'm not sure if you all are experiencing this on the western side of the state, but the teachers, right, in the classroom are starting to kind of get tired, where they're ready to take their summer off, and there are reports that some of them may not return. And there's a program called Troops to Teachers. Have you ever heard of it?
I have not, but I'm really happy that you brought this up because my neighbor is a teacher and has dealt with a headache this past year, and she's taking a year off next year. Wow. So you're speaking directly to this. So, please say the title of that again. Troops to Teachers.
It was funded by the Department of Defense. It started in the 1993, 1994 timeframe. So I'm still in, high school at the time, and it helped service members, retirees transition, gain their certification or certificate to teach their licenses in the classroom, and they put them in high needs areas. And it just so happened, I really do think it's coincidental that the strategic defunding is about to hit in October. I haven't been able to get the information that I need to identify if there's bridge support for that, but we have veterans all over the country that have decided to go into the classroom that may very well be losing their support at a time when we need them to stay where they are, and we need them to lead where they are.
That's really incredible. I'm gonna definitely talk with my neighbor about this, and I hope my audience looks this up too. Troops to Teachers.
I mean, we're so well suited to do this because most of the time in the military, we're trained. We're trained ourselves, and then we turn and train our neighbors. I mean, that's why we have the most successful military in the world, because we are so highly trained.
Absolutely. And where do the children go that enlist in the military? A lot of them come right out of high school, and then they become the responsibility of those non-commissioned officers to train.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. This reminds me of the great conversation we had here on the Scuttlebutt with Mitch Fossum. He wrote a really interesting op-ed about the civ-mil relationship that was posted. I think it was in militarytimes.com. We had a good conversation about how veterans should come back into the community and lead within the community, because the community needs the veteran. And that's what brought me to the main question of, does the desire to serve continue beyond your service in the military, which was very interesting to me. That I think, okay, I'm going to retire and I'm going to be done with my work, but a lot of active servicemen and women, they come out at very young age, and a lot of them went in with that really big, that passion to serve the country. And where does that go? Where does that passion go? And can it lead into, I got to plant myself in this community, I got to become a part of the coaching team for my kid, I got to maybe join
Yes.
city council,
Yes.
do these things, because not only is it great for the leadership aspect that you can bring to the community, but
Yes.
it can help the community members understand more about veterans.
I really think it's just ingrained in the DNA of people, whether you serve 6 years or 26 years, about servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just fundamental to who we are. Now, there may be a small group of people that, maybe had sort of a challenging or disappointing experience in the military, and maybe servant leadership isn't really what they're all about. But I quoted that research study that said veterans are definitely civic assets. They're the ones who donate to charity, volunteer as basketball coaches, who vote, certainly, who help a neighbor through a challenging situation. And the other comment here is that when we experience tough times and we're struggling, what are we told? We're told to help somebody else to help us with our healing, right? So there's a values foundation for it. And I also think that there's a healing foundation for it. And just a general orientation that's inculcated in us, maybe by those drill sergeants like Nefertari's dad, right? I mean, because it's not about you. And when you're a leader, when you're in the military, it is not about you.
Great. I'll share, like, I remember being a child. I couldn't have been more than 6 years old. And my father was a senior drill sergeant at Fort Benning in Georgia. And I'd gone in to work with him for the day. He, walked me over to where the soldiers were sitting. His, drill sergeant hat brim was low. He's got me by the hand, and they jump up and to attention and say, "Good morning, drill sergeant." He says, "Good morning, soldiers. Say good morning to my daughter." And they scream to the top of their lungs, "Good morning, ma'am." And that sticks. That sticks with an individual, right?
Absolutely.
And so what I love is the organization, the structure. There's a lot of flexibility in it, right? So they say that our military is the greatest in the world because, we don't follow our own rules. We don't follow our own plans. But to have that plan is really important. And in the civilian sector, sometimes that plan's not always in place. It's not always well thought out, and it's not always thought out strategically long term, where it hits for the greater good. And so I've seen service members struggle with not knowing where they are in time and in space, right? So I've seen them take on like imposter syndrome. Like, you have led for 20 plus years. What do you mean you can't go and be a director at, right? You don't have a bachelor's degree. There are all these reasons that some individuals tell themselves, but they're ready. They're prepared. They have prepared for this their whole adult career. So I'd like to see more of it. And like I said, I know there are opportunities in the classroom. There are opportunities in higher education, whether that's the administration or actually on their way to professorship. It's just a matter of us identifying and or creating those opportunities for them to get there.
I just wanted to say, if I was a little bit younger, I'd go get a PhD in the military civilian divide. What is that? How can we fix it? So Neff, I don't know if you've picked your topic yet, but I want to pitch that because, I think it's really tragic that our country invests millions of dollars transitioning a civilian into a warrior, which is absolutely critical, right? Mm-hmm. But where is the comprehensive, purpose-driven, deliberate program to welcome our service members all the way home, whether or not they went to combat, but to help them reintegrate in ways that maximizes their quality of life? We just don't do that well in this society. And it's really tragic. We're missing a lot of opportunity. Our GDP could be higher. because our veterans could get into their first match job quickly and, promote that productivity. And I believe we'd save lives and the suicide rate would drop dramatically if we knew how to do this better.
It seems like the veterans that I have spoken with, mainly post 9/11 generation veterans who had potential or suicidal ideations, found purpose, and whether that was in a service animal or a new job or a new passion, found their way out of that. And you're right. I think that if there was as much focus on that reintegration, that transition, that, as you said, bringing them all the way home, I could see that happening.
We have a long way to go. And so I implore every single one of you who's listening, whether you're a civilian or a veteran, civilians, please, if you would, maybe get the book and start learning, what you could do from where you sit in your perspective. It's on Amazon. If you are a veteran advocate and you've served, please go out and talk to your citizen neighbors and, teach them about military culture and ask them to offer substantive ways to support reintegration. And just, because people don't know what they don't know. They want to help, but they feel awkward. They're not sure what to say. You can coach them. Our veterans can coach civilians about how to have a meaningful dialogue with the veteran and then take action to really help them do well.
I'm hearing a lot of passion in this episode, which I really appreciate. I really do. And I was just about to ask before we dove into that a bit, is Nefertari, your passion and through the Third Lieutenant podcast, this idea of education, this passion for education. Where did that come from? Where's the seed?
So I just had an outstanding education provided by the Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. I really did and didn't know it until I came back stateside. And, as a 10th grader, I was immediately put in classes with seniors. Right. So that kind of shook my social network, where even today I know individuals and have befriended individuals who are older than me and not so much with my peer group. So the Third Lieutenant is just kind of one arm of the way that I exercise my passion and my purpose in education. I actually, during the pandemic, established an LLC, which in Pennsylvania is recognized as a benefit structure. So very similar to a B Corp that people, planet, and profit. So this benefit LLC is called Teachers and with an ampersand to denote collaboration, right? Because I many of us saw this shift coming. And so helping educators manage the change, adapt to the change, that adapt and overcome, that saying we have in the military, it's a real thing. And I do believe that there's a lot happening with our young people that our teachers are not prepared for, because many of them have been teachers their whole career. So there's a lot of things in the traditional workplace that they've not had to overcome. So because they're preparing the young people to go out into the workforce, to go into higher education, to go into the military, if they haven't had that lived experience, they need to be able to tap into someone else's. So that is what I do through Teachers and.
I love that. Tapping into someone else's life experience.
Can I ask before I forget, why do you call the podcast Third Lieutenant?
Okay, you ready, Kathy?
I am. Please give it to me.
Right. So again, because I was first a pilot before I was a driver, right?
There's a whole podcast around that particular story that I'm sure would be an incredible story on its own right. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I didn't know it at the time, but the Third Lieutenant was actually a unofficial rank in the pre-Air Force, in the Army Air Corps, right? And there was a gentleman, General H.H. Arnold, who released a memo that said that you will treat these flight officers with all the respect that you would a third lieutenant. The reason they were third lieutenants and not second lieutenants is because they didn't have college degrees. right?
Oh,
They weren't of the appropriate age and they didn't have the education requirements. But during World War II, we needed so many pilots, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I became a signaleer. I became first an enlisted personnel as a computer systems analyst, and now I am a communications officer, always been communications. But my track through mentorship should have been aviation. I didn't have the mentorship. So for me, there's a lot of themes that reoccur in my life and in my experience that, in hindsight, it's 2020, right? So that's the third lieutenant. It's that unknown quantity that we value that in hindsight, it's like, that's it. That's what makes them so special. That's what they bring to the fight.
love it. It's the special sauce that makes veterans who they are, right? That
Exactly,
commitment, that
Kathy.
passion, that patriotism. Really, there's a special sauce for people who serve, I think.
And that actually leads me to my last topic that I wanted to talk about. Is this episode is releasing after June 12th, which has recently been dubbed Women Veterans Day. And I wanted to talk with both of you, being female veterans, what this day means to you, and if there was a veteran advocate or a veteran champion, woman or otherwise, that you looked up to. Nefertari, would you like to go first?
General Mary Bethune, McLeod Bethune. She was an honorary general with the Women's Army Corps, and she did a lot to not only ensure that African American service members, but also women and even families were taken care of. She was the founder of Bethune-Cookman University in Florida, and just has an amazing story. For Women's History Month, I did a 15-minute episode on her. So you can check that out on the Third Lieutenant podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. And I then shared all the women that have impacted my journey, who have navigated me through their leadership along their way. So I'm not going to take up too much time naming names, but I definitely have had many women in my life that have made an impression. My sister has served in the military, and my mother, again, was that first service member that I know and I love.
How wonderful would that be to have a mother role model who'd served in the military, especially in that generation, if you will. That's really special.
She gave me my first salute.
Oh, you're gonna be
And
make
we
me
cried.
cry.
We cried. So did everyone in the audience. We cried.
I couldn't even bring my arm up if my mom gave me my first salute.
Aw,
That's beautiful.
good for you.
Yeah.
My dad gave me my first salute, but it would be a little different if your mom did it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty exciting that Congress has designated, given us, if you will, a Women's Veterans Day. I know it was somewhat controversial. Some of my sisters in arms did not feel it was necessary. And I'm honored by that. In particular, let me tell you sort of a personal story, right? So my husband's 6'2", gregarious, very good looking, short hair, decent shape, right? And so we go out socially. And if the topic of military comes up, do you think people even look at me to talk about military? Right?
Yeah, we're all shaking our head if you're listening to this.
And so, this is my identity too, right? I mean, I grew up as a military kid, spent 29 years. Now he's a combat veteran. He was on active duty. He did the yeoman's work, and I respect and admire his role and his leadership and everything that he contributed. But to walk away from a social interaction and not be able to share my pride and enthusiasm about my service doesn't feel too good. Okay, now, granted, I have some responsibility in that, but it's a little awkward to say, I serve too, I mean, how do you weave that into the conversation, right? So the VA has a campaign for women veterans that it basically says, I'm not invisible. And now when 20% of our recruits are all women, now when we have our first Blue Angel pilot, Thunderbird pilot, you probably know this stuff better than I do, Neff. I mean, women, and in particular African American women, are breaking the glass ceiling inside the military It makes you want to cry. It's so exciting. Okay. So there's definitely a lot of pride and enthusiasm that women have for serving, and for them to not be recognized or appreciated or seemingly valued as much as our male counterparts, kind of stings a little bit. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to maybe be less invisible, and be acknowledged. And it's changing and it's growing. And one more quick story. So last night I was at a Bunker Labs event and met a female Army combat veteran. And she said she shies away from women's groups because she's uncomfortable going to them, because she'll start talking about her military experience, i.e., her combat experience, and she sees people's faces change. They don't know how, they don't know how to identify, relate. I mean, they just feel awkward, and she felt awkward. And so we have got to figure out how to listen, care, and not make our women veterans feel completely disconnected because of how they've sacrificed. I don't know, Nefertari, what do you think?
So I'll one up you. So my spouse is not a service member, never was, but when we do say, he gets mistaken as the service member, right? And so it doesn't bother me. I will say that I have had individuals tell me, once they were aware of my status, of my experience as a service member, they're like, oh, now that makes sense, right? It makes sense why you speak the way you do, why you walk the way you do, why you hold yourself the way that you do. So as we talk about, the future being female, as we talk about wanting equity, right, access, if we talk about wanting women to lead, I think that we're a demographic, although small, a mighty demographic that could help with some of the norms, because we're automatically respected because of our connected status, right? And it's not like we didn't earn it. We know what we're talking about. If you want something fixed, we will come in and we will fix it for you. I will say that I'm grateful to live here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where if you wanted to, you could get a license plate, that shares your status. Just quick Google search and looking, it says that the Googler says that there are approximately 60,000 women veterans that call Pennsylvania home. Right. So what I have found is, if you're familiar with the social media app Clubhouse, there is a growing group of women veterans that are connecting there. And being in the Army, I haven't taken advantage of wearing a loose ponytail or studs in my combat uniform just yet. I'm in a field artillery unit, so I'm holding off on that. It's not quite comfortable for me just yet.
Changing, huh?
Yeah, it's changing, and it's changing fast. And there was a lot of blowback from that. It was quite interesting. It was quite interesting to watch, but it's changing fast.
Which is not normal for the military. Change fast is two terms that don't usually go hand in hand. Something we heard from a couple veterans several weeks back on the Scuttlebutt is it was a message to civilians. When you walk into a room, allow yourself to think that the people in that room that you don't expect to be veterans are veterans, which I thought was really, really enlightening. When you walk into a room, and allow yourself to imagine that the people that you wouldn't expect are actually veterans. And that just gives you one little bit. When you walk into a room, you may just, you don't have to think that it's always going to be this stereotype veteran. It could be anybody in that room could be a veteran. And one last thing I want to touch on that I've heard repeated a couple times is this idea of identity. There are times where I've found in my life that I sort of identify myself with my job, or I define myself by my job. But it seems like, as we've also heard during this podcast, adaptability. How do you feel both of your identities have shifted and evolved over the course of your careers and your life between service and your civilian life?
So how has a lot of things have come full circle, Sean? A lot of things that I started out thinking, desiring, have come full circle. So that servant leadership has always been there, right? I haven't gotten back in a plane just yet, but I have started out, I started out as a technologist. I got out of that and did 7.5 years in the commercial radio and broadcasting industry. Then I transitioned and kind of tried to figure out what was going to happen with me next. And I've gotten back into technology, and I actually work in cybersecurity for the Department of the Navy. And so now, with all of that lived experience, with honed and sharpened skills of communication, both verbal and written, it's been an opportunity for me to look back and say, wow, maybe I thought I made mistakes, but really I learned lessons that now I can apply, and I can go at this thing in a better way. And so now I have my oldest is about to graduate from high school. And so wanting to ensure that mentorship for him is in place, and really just, again, learning from the experience. All we really can do is iterate, have a plan. Doesn't survive the first shot, but have a plan. Right. And there's something that, I thought about earlier, but didn't share. And that's about not so much staying in your lane, but assuming a role, which is a part of the identity that you talked about. In the Army, or even in joint operations, you'll have like a staff section, and everybody is aligned with an area of specialty. Someone's concerned with logistics, someone's concerned with communications, someone's overseeing everything in operations. And then you have like this depth of planning where you have the close fight, and you have the deep fight, and you have like rear support. And if we start to work together to help individuals understand that language, they understand the concept, but they feel like because they didn't have an MBA, or because they didn't go to B school or whatever, that they can't do that. But we all can do that. And so if we have an objective together, some goals together in our communities, and we start to really access the knowledge, skills, and abilities of service members, the things that they have learned from the past that maybe they thought were mistakes, those learning opportunities, they can bring that to this fight, because we are recovering from a fight. And everything that 2020 and 2021 has shown us is there might still be some fight left, right? So if we start, we start to work together, we can bring back that Coca-Cola song, and Michael Jackson's not with us anymore, but singing, and I mean, it'll be amazing.
Yeah.
I want to stand up and applaud, Nefertari. Thank you. I'll follow you anywhere.
Leadership.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Amen. I appreciate that. I think the question is about identity, right?
Yeah.
And I think as youth, we acquire certain beliefs and themes that really stick to us. For me, my first opportunity to go outside my comfort zone, I found in Girl Scouts. And in Girl Scouts, I also learned civic participation. In Girl Scouts, I learned servant leadership. In Girl Scouts, I learned my love of the outdoors. All those things translated into military service, right? And now that I have, I don't wear my uniform every day, these things are still etched in stone in my heart and my head. And so I'm going to use servant leadership as well. My identity is wrapped around that notion. How can I serve? And as a Girl Scout, I learned, I'm serious, as a Girl Scout, I learned, leave the campsite better than you found it. Okay. And so throughout my adult life, I have just gotten so much meaning, reward, and joy out of trying to make a difference, trying to create something new where there's gaps, and leaving the campsite better than how I found it. And I'm still doing that. Even though I don't wear my uniform every day, I am totally immersed in the veteran community and leveraging everything about Kathy that Kathy treasures, does well and not so well, to leverage my skill set to make our communities better for those who sacrifice so much from us in partnership with our civilians.
Well, certainly you're leaving myself and hopefully the Scuttlebutt audience here better than how we found it at the beginning of the hour. For both of you, it's just been an incredible and fast conversation here today. I have really really appreciated your truths and your passions today, and for joining me on this podcast to talk about what you've been up to, and I'm so inspired. I always use that. I always leave VBC programs feeling inspired, and I guess it's part of the mission. So I guess we're doing our job. Um,
Yes, you are.
but I want to thank you both for being a part of the conversation today, and I want to thank the audience as well. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell on YouTube, and send me an email. If you've had a reaction to some of the stuff we're talking about or thoughts, you can always reach out to me, Shaun, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. I want to leave you both with final thoughts. Kathy, any final thoughts?
Yes, please. And I would hope you'd reach out to me as well about your thoughts about becoming a veteran champion. If you're a civilian, if you're a veteran, I'd love to hear from you. My email is Kathy with a K at vanguardveteran.com. And because we're both women veterans, I want to give a shout out to Amanda Huffman, who has a podcast called Women of the Military, who just went over, I think it was 50,000 listeners. So if you're a woman veteran, go listen to the great work that she's doing. Thank you, Shaun and Todd, again, for all that you're doing and giving me an opportunity to share some of my thinking with you here today.
And I'll just echo what Kathy said. Listen to podcasts, whether it be Scuttlebutt or Women of the Military or the Third Lieutenant podcast. I appreciate it. Listen, subscribe, and share. And I'll ask you, not so much to contact me, but if you would take your energy and contact your local elected official and inquire about the status of the Troops to Teachers program in your community. If you have the opportunity to reach out and support a classroom educator and encourage them to go back in the classroom, we don't want education to become the next crisis that we all have to survive together. So let's do the right thing. Thank you.
Fantastic points. Thank you both. And thank you, audience. We'll be back next week for another episode of The Scuttlebutt. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for another episode of The Scuttlebutt. I want to thank D&D Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage for their generous support and sponsorship of this program. You can find their locations, get quotes, and ask about availability at D&D autosalvage.com. That's D&D autosalvage.com. We'll see you next week here on The Scuttlebutt.